Welcome to the debate. When we talk about digital platforms today, we often frame the crisis in economic terms, monopolies, data extraction, or perhaps as a moral failure, the spread of misinformation. But a much deeper, more fundamental problem seems to be emerging, the restructuring of human reasoning itself.
And that deeper layer is exactly what this recent Xenobiolinguistic framework tackles. It offers a powerful, if somewhat unsettling lens. It proposes that digital platforms function less like tools and more like, quasi-parasitic linguistic organisms that feed on and ultimately reorganize our capacity for public speech.
That's right, and the consequence of this reorganization, according to the source material, is organized immaturity, a wholesale erosion of the individual's capacity for autonomous public use of reason. It's an updated diagnosis, really, moving beyond Kant's voluntary intellectual laziness to this new algorithmic surrender of judgment.
The framework provides a tremendous amount of detail, but it does force us to confront a central ambiguity about the source of the problem.
Absolutely. So the core question we're wrestling with today is this. Does this organized immaturity primarily result from a pathogenic linguistic mutation and semiotic capture, a sickness where the function of language itself is corrupted and outsourced? Or is it fundamentally a structural condition driven by the platform's complete reorganization of symbolic capital and social habitus?
I'll be taking the latter position. While the shift in language is key, I'm going to argue that organized immaturity is better understood as a stable, structurally dependent equilibrium. Users adapt their behavior, their digital habitus, as you said, to maximize their symbolic fitness within the platform's enclosed field. It's a system feature, not just a linguistic bug.
I, on the other hand, will argue that this is foremost a semiotic infection, a deep pathology of language use itself. It represents a decisive, engineered shift from autonomous symbolic production, the act of thinking and articulating, to mere passive consumption.
A pathology, though, suggests an external sickness invading a healthy body. I'm a little skeptical of that premise.
Well, to begin, we have to recognize that autonomy is fundamentally a linguistic capacity. To reason publicly is to inhabit language as an active, generative medium. When platforms become what the framework calls semiotic organisms, they don't just host communication. They actively recode it. They function as semiotic parasites because their core metabolic mechanism is the consumption and monetization of our symbolic competence. And that normalizes dependency.
Okay, can you ground that a bit? What does consumption of symbolic competence actually look like in practice?
It looks like delegated sense-making. The primary mechanism of immaturity is a mutation in our use of language. We effectively outsource core reasoning tasks like verification, organization, or filtering to algorithmic grammars, and these interface-governed vocabularies. Just think about how often we rely on a trending topic list or a search bar's autocomplete to define what's important or even what's true.
So the platform isn't just filtering what we see. It's supplying the very terms of the debate before the debate can even start.
Precisely. And the truly alarming part is that the subject participates in their own semiotic outsourcing. We adopt these linguistic shortcuts because they promise speed and efficiency, but they gradually hollow out our individual judgment. This is the platform's constitutional power, the power to define the closed linguistic system itself, establishing the grammar of reality within that field. And unlike natural human language, platform code, it tolerates no ambiguity. It's a strict proprietary syntax.
I grant you the structural power of the code, but focusing solely on the rulebook ignores the reward system that actually drives a user's choices. I would frame the results of this power differently. I'd place the emphasis not on infection, but on adaptation.
How so?
Well, while the linguistic recoding is happening, the core of organized immaturity lies in the user's structural and psychological adaptation to the platform's enclosed linguistic ecologies. This is really where Bourdieu's ideas of field and habitus become essential. platforms institute these asymmetric linguistic relations, meaning your expressive act is not equal to mine if I have a million more followers. We exchange content, sure, but the platform pre-structures that exchange to generate what the framework calls semiotic biomass, that crucial transactional data they need.
That sounds like a sophisticated term for, well, efficient data collection.
It is, but it describes how we change our behavior to maximize the biomass we generate. Immaturity in this light emerges as a learned grammar of survival, the digital habitus. It's the muscle memory we develop for speaking in a way that the algorithm will reward. Users internalize this logic through repetition, adapting their tone, usually towards outrage or simplicity, their timing, their content, all to accumulate linguistic capital, which translates directly into visibility.
So you see this as a pragmatic choice, that users are, in a sense, rational agents, maximizing fitness within a toxic environment.
Exactly. I'm not convinced this is merely infection. It feels more like a stable, self-reinforcing equilibrium. Agents willingly offload the difficult, slow work of interpretive capacity because doing so maximizes their symbolic fitness within that highly optimized field. Thinking becomes inefficient and redundant precisely because the structural rewards for not thinking, for conforming to the platform's linguistic demands, are so great and so immediate. It's an adaptation to radical efficiency.
Let's delve into that erosion of autonomy then, because I maintain that the outcome is fundamentally a cognitive and linguistic loss, resulting from a pathology of delegation.
You focus on the internal loss.
Yes. When we delegate core interpretive labor to search algorithms, recommendation systems, automated moderation, reflection is replaced by prediction. Ethical deliberation is just reduced to engagement metrics. The infrastructure is specifically designed to make mature, nuanced thinking inefficient, redundant, or invisible. This leads to what's called semiotic necrosis, where an individual's unique expressive singularity, what makes our voice ours, is decomposed into statistically tractable fragments. We get personalization without personality. The human subject loses its capacity for expressive integrity because the environment punishes expressive uniqueness.
I agree the thinking becomes inefficient, but I attribute that less to a kind of cognitive necrosis and more to the systemic incentive structure. The framework calls this distinction power. Users retain the appearance of choice. They can type whatever they want, sure, but their capacity for meaningful public reason is eroded because the platform is actively engineering taste by modulating interfaces, rankings, and visibility scores.
And how is that engineering different from just providing a space?
It produces a structural condition where users act within grammars they did not author, yet they experience that constraint as convenience or personalization. Think about how much easier it is to share an outrage cycle than to write a 1,500-word nuanced essay on the subject. The platform rewards the former with massive visibility. The agent is trapped in this recursively self-infecting loop, supplying the linguistic residues that constantly refine the very pathogen, the algorithm, that governs them. It's an efficient system of linguistic codependence, not just pure consumption.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of governance. If we accept the idea of constraint, where does the deepest power reside? I still argue that code is the ultimate constraint. The platform's deepest power is constitutional.
The rulebook, right.
Exactly. Code operates as a closed linguistic system. It defines what can be expressed, how it can connect, and who gets to see it. This is semiotic world-making. It establishes the symbolic ontology, what is real within that field. And supporting this is juridical power. Sanctions, account suspension, demotion in the feed, deplatforming, they function as semiotic antibodies that induce anticipatory compliance. You learn the limits of the language long before you ever test them, and that limits your reflexive distance from the system.
I understand constitutional power as the hard-coded limits. But the organizing principle of organized immaturity, I think, is driven more by distinction power. While code is the bedrock, the pressure on the user is exerted through these evaluative infrastructures.
Like the like button?
Much more complex than that. These infrastructures, scores, rankings, recommendation metrics, monetization tiers, They function as xenosemiotic organs. They convert heterogeneous social practices, a tweet, a comment, a reaction, a share, into a single proprietary operational language of visibility and rank. This process creates what the source material calls uber capital. It's a unified currency of social value.
So distinction power is the platform turning everything we say into a tradable commodity of status.
Precisely. Status markers, like follower counts or verification badges, they act as morphological signals that guide user adaptation. The platform's grammar, therefore, isn't primarily propositional, defining what is allowed, but it's fundamentally evaluative. It defines what is worth doing or what is worth seeing. If you want visibility, you have to speak the language of the ranking algorithm. This drives the self-infliction of immaturity because users consciously choose to offload the difficult, slow work of deliberation for the easy, immediate reward of recognition.
But if distinction power is so central, why does the system remain closed? Users accumulating uber capital are still performing within a syntax defined by the constitutional power, by the code itself. Distinction power merely distributes rewards within the cage that the constitutional power built. The cage itself remains structurally immutable, based on the parasitic needs of the organism. The code is the ultimate master.
The cage is important, but the master is a social desire for rank. The platform leverages that very human need for recognition to make the cage comfortable. If users didn't want the status, the distinction mechanism would just collapse. The mechanism of immaturity is behavioral adaptation, not just forced semantic conformity.
Which raises the question of resistance. If the language is poisoned, what happens when we try to speak differently? The unfortunate truth is that counterpowers, like crowd mobilization or online activism, are often quickly reabsorbed, aestheticized, or monetized. They just become another nutrient stream in the platform's metabolic cycle. Platform owners redesign algorithms and interfaces specifically to translate that excess meaning back into controlled grammar.
So you're saying the platform's grammar has a kind of self-sealing property?
Exactly. The system is functionally designed to neutralize forms of mature, autonomous reasoning. It's a closed loop because even resistance is converted back into data that reinforces the architecture. The parasite is highly adaptable.
I agree that mass mobilization often fails because it remains discursive when the platform's grammar is computational. It's often quickly converted into predictable patterns. But that's not the only form of counterpower. We need to consider the function of hacking power.
Hacking power operates against the constitutional order. It's by definition marginal and often criminalized. It seems like an exception, not a systemic solution.
But it's qualitatively different. It's different because it requires genuine interpretive competence, the very kind of maturity we're arguing is being eroded. Hacking is a metalinguistic intervention. It operates in the interstices of the system by exploiting semantic ambiguities and anticipating algorithmic patterns. Think about security researchers who find novel ways to disrupt disinformation campaigns, not through simple reporting, but by understanding the back-end logic that promotes them.
So it's not simply arguing about the content, it's arguing about the code itself.
Precisely. It demonstrates a capacity for true organized maturity within these alien semiotic systems. Even if it's criminalized or quickly patched, these acts show that autonomy can be reclaimed, not by refusing the language, but by understanding its underlying grammar well enough to subvert it. It provides a blueprint for what systemic critique looks like. It reminds us that intellectual capacity is not fully decomposed. It just needs the right tools to engage at the level of the system's own syntax.
But again, the sheer adaptive capacity of the platform organism quickly assimilates those interventions. They are mutations that are often neutralized or absorbed, strengthening the platform's overall immunological, juridical response. The primary lesson, for me, remains that our expressive capacities are continually reoriented toward platform-defined ends, confirming that parasitic hold.
And the lesson I take is that the capacity for autonomy is not dead, but merely hidden, requiring a systemic, metalinguistic understanding of the platform's evaluative logic to reawaken it.
To conclude, I think our discussion reinforces the idea that Organized immaturity is the result of a structural homology between the platform's grammar and our everyday practice, maintained by a self-inflicted process where dependence is rewarded. The parasitic linguistic capture is so deep that users internalize the grammar not through coercion, but through simple habituation and delegation of thought. Addressing this requires radical interventions at the level of language and symbolic ecology to interrupt the platform's metabolic cycle.
And I'd agree that the platform's power is incredibly resilient, but fundamentally it operates through the intimate reprogramming of status and social meaning, the digital habitus. The key challenge is that immaturity is efficient and aggressively reinforced by distinction power. So, reorienting this process toward what we might call organized enlightenment requires a systemic understanding of how power is performed not just linguistically through code, but effectively, given that outrage, fear, and shallow recognition are the high-energy linguistic particles that drive engagement and shape our choices.
Right. Whether the mechanism of control is primarily the constitutional power of code or the evaluative distinction of rankings, our discussion confirms that platform power operates beyond conventional economic models. It rests instead on the organization and control of meaning itself.
Leaving the listener to consider which mechanism of semiotic control, the hard-coded limits or the soft pressure of status, is most central to the erosion of autonomy in their own digital life.